Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I'm one of the last ones to speak, so there is not much news I can tell you, so I'm going to be as brief as possible. We talked a lot about the three main ways related with cannabis. One would be related to freedom, the self-growing and the non-stigma of the consumption. The second is something that is more and more talked about and that is more and more horizontal in the civil society, and it is everything related to the medicinal use. And the last approach is not often talked about, and we don't often give it more importance, and it is the approach related with the relationship with the productive model, the relationship with the capacity and the economic potential of marijuana integrated within a productive system. And obviously, at first hand, it might be shocking. The German writer, Mr. Müller, said that the first reaction is stupefaction, and it's true. And because we are going against mainstream, we are going against a general belief in society, and we could compare it with the universal revenue, because at first it creates a lot of surprise, people are flabbergasted and they even reject that, but after a while, after some inner debate, we start believing it is a new common sense. 20 years ago, having minimum wage was shocking. Now it's more and more a necessity, and in some years we're not going to ask about whether or not having a minimum wage is important, but mostly what would be the minimum wage. And a few years ago, having such an event in a public institution would be unacceptable, but because we're not only talking about the medicinal use, but we're also talking about the reproductive and recreational use of the cannabis. And in a few years' time, we will mostly speak about how to apply in the economy or in society the aspect of marijuana, because we need to talk about these issues, because we need to fight together to create the best conditions in order to put the life of the patients and the citizens at the heart of the strategies. Not to benefit some private companies. We want to prevent cannabis from becoming another type of goods that can be traded in any other way. So it's not about whether we can sell cannabis or not, but about the model we are going to choose. And this is also a political and cultural conflict. A conflict for common sense. Why do we think what we think? What is possible, what isn't possible, what is normal, what is not normal? Why do we choose politics to define what's good and what's bad in society? Because in a way, the lie cannot be fought against with the truth, but we need to create new and stronger realities. And this is something that is always in conflict and that is always shaping up society. And events such as today and protests such as the one that is going to be organized help us move the center of gravity and help us change the mindset. Very briefly, we talked about different cases. And currently, we are in an international context that favors the debate around cannabis and marijuana without entering into the debate of the pros and cons. And this creates a platform where we can debate and we can present our arguments and put the cannabis issue on the agenda. An article was recently published in a Spanish newspaper on Portugal. Portugal is thinking about the possibility of being the center of marijuana production for the whole of Europe, because the potential we had a potential consumers number of 90 million people, and of course this is opening up new horizons for the south of Europe, because on the one hand we were talking about the operations, about the capacity of transforming cannabis into a good that would be interesting not only for the consumers, for recreational users and medicinal users, but also convincing society that this is something that is interesting for all of us. Even if we don't all smoke marijuana, but we have to convince society that this can be good for the whole of society, and so we need to change the image of marijuana. And this is and we will do that presenting different arguments, not only marijuana, but the job creation potential, the development potential. We have to go beyond the tree that hides the forest. We cannot only relate marijuana with drug use or joints. We cannot ridicule marijuana because it is a very serious topic, and very often when we speak about marijuana, we think about drugs, but we have to change the mindset. And when we think about marijuana in the future, we have to think about tomatoes or any other kind of vegetable. This is a food that we can grow, that we can transform, and that we can sell according to some health criteria. And it can generate tax revenue to fund other things. When you think about tomatoes or pears or apples, it doesn't seem weird. But when we think about marijuana, it's shocking. So we need to change the mindset. We cannot stay focused on the classical vision of marijuana, but we need to expand the spectrum. And if you want to change the productive model, in a way, we need to question the current architecture of the EU and the labour division, and we need to change the structure of who produces what, where, when, and how. In the case of Spain and Southern Europe, for instance, we have to, and for the rest of Europe, when you speak about changing the productive model, it means that we need to value an economic modernization plan with public expenditures to modernize some sectors like technological sectors and energy transition sectors in order to reduce the energy fracture transition. In Spain, for instance, 75% of the energy is imported, and it costs 40 million euros, and we need to reduce that energy bill with a specific program such as the one that was applied in Germany. For instance, buildings were renovated in order to be more energy efficient, so the CO2 emissions are reduced, and the energy costs were also reduced, and their economy is now richer. And so we see that the change of productive model means that we are going to fill the gap and the inequalities between men and women, and we need to guarantee a whole charter of social rights, like the right to health, to housing, to food, and so on and so forth. And we need to integrate marijuana in this program to change the productive model. And this is questioning the current model of the EU. We're not questioning Europe, but questioning the way labour is divided in Europe. And that's why we need to use bigger words. I'm going to be very brief and very quick. I think that Europe is losing a huge opportunity. I'm speaking about Spain, but the whole south of Europe is concerned. We are losing the opportunities of a huge opportunity because we have the best climate conditions. Countries such as Spain, Portugal, Italy and Greece are losing such an opportunity because the production of marijuana and the export potentials are huge for these countries. So these southern countries can become producer countries, and this would help them get out of their assignated model, because we are very often the target of speculation, and we are often just tourist countries, and this would help us change the productive model. And I think that this is something that we need to promote as a European policy. We often say that we want to have better European coordination for taxes, for debt restructuring. The Troika is, of course, only focusing on that, but we need to focus on labour as well. As I said, the matter of productive model is more related. Well, in Spain, there are no studies, strict studies on the effects on the GDP, on the effects of on jobs, how many jobs would be created with the trade of marijuana. So putting it on the agenda would help us talk more about that, and so we would generate enough interest in order to launch these studies and have sufficient proof to go further in that sense. And to conclude, I would say that in the Spanish case, a majority of the population is in favor of legalizing marijuana for recreational use, and not only use. And I'm not the only one saying that, but some public institutions also indicate that more than 52% of the population in Spain are in favor of legalizing marijuana. The Federation of Fight Against Narcotics and Drug Addiction show that the population is in favor of legalizing cannabis, and between the age of 18 and 34, 72% of the population in that age gap are in favor of legalizing marijuana for recreational use. And one last comment. When we speak about changing the productive model and about legalization, we need to integrate some elements in order to avoid speculative businesses and fiscal paradises. We need to include social criteria, labor criteria, local economy criteria, and proximity community locals. We need to include environmental criteria. Manuel said that the indoor production models of marijuana lead to huge CO2 emissions, but in Spain we have 3,000 hours of light a year, so this is nonsensical, because we could produce outside, and so we would produce less emissions. And so if we want to have a European strategy, the south of Europe would be the production area to provide the rest of the countries. And that's it.